Hello, guys, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the Futurism at J2 podcast. I'm Ricardo, your host, and I am joined by Bryan,
Hello.
our kind of recurring co host at this point.
Yeah.
And today we actually wanted to talk a little bit about a range of topics, but mostly centering on wealth inequality, wage gaps. Everything's just kind of expensive now.
Yeah.
And, maybe what the future of the US and potentially just like a broader outlook on international just like economies, how that will look like in the future. And one of the reasons that we wanted to talk about this and we came upon this topic was because we lived through COVID, right? Everybody probably that's watching this went through the whole COVID cycle. And whenever that started, everything just started to get more and more expensive. It felt kind of like exponentially, right? Like eggs, for example, were super like high priced. People were struggling to like get their groceries, even more so because they couldn't go outside.
So everything came like waves where like first it was when people were able to save a bit of money during COVID, but then after COVID and the restrictions started easing, we saw prices for gas greatly increase, and we slowly saw it transition to like other places, specifically like groceries. Where then like during the tail ends of COVID, that's when like eggs, milk, and other like essential foods starting to get like more and more expensive, making it like more difficult.
Yeah, and not only that, but like recently, especially with like a lot of developments in like AI, we come back to the question of like, what do people's work environments and like workforce look like? Because, you're introducing this new technology, which is again sort of jeopardizing some aspects of certain jobs, like for example, writing. A lot of people kind of like first saw this happening, but especially when you're talking about articles from like games, news organizations, stuff like that, a lot of the writers for these articles, they were just pumping out content, and to some degree, like these companies don't really care about the quality of their content. They just care about the quantity, right? Because they kind of get their money off the clicks. So they're just able to like replace a whole workload of like writers for these AI models that are just able to like generate and pump stuff, right? So because of this, and our labor market right now, it isn't great. Like I've experienced this. I'm sure you've seen other students at Hopkins experience this, right?
Yeah.
People are just searching and like scrambling for jobs. It's not easy.
No, especially in the like I'll say like more like software engineering and like CS related like
very
focus,
tech fields,
where people are like worried about like the future of it. However, I want to come up to more like optimistic angle, because like I also use like ChatGPT, and like I've heard like a lot of other people who use in industry who are trying to like take advantage of these AI models, and like they're really powerful and everything, but to me it's more of I always see it as like an opportunity to make the life of workers easier and to increase productivity. It's kind of like the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution took away many jobs, but created like million more.
Yeah, and that's
I think
whole,
it all depends on like how it's used. Like right now I'm scared of it. Yeah. Because then like there have been like some like cool stuff happening like with the SAG writer union in Hollywood, kind of like saying like, hey, if you want to work with our union workers, you have to make sure that you're not going to get rid of us by using AI. Get rid of our writers. Get rid of the actors. Like you can't just start like replacing us with machine. I think when like protection like that are in place, it'll be a force of good. But when we have companies making record profits and then the year after they start cutting off like labor off like workers, despite them making like record profits, it's kind of like it makes me afraid.
Yeah, no, and it's definitely something that has come up like again and again.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even pertain to just CS. Again, I've heard of people really worried about CS, for example, because now instead of needing, I don't know, like 5 developers, 1 senior, and potentially all the other ones like junior, now maybe you only need like 1 senior with access to ChatGPT, and you have somebody that's able to work around a lot of the faults that come with GPT. So it is increasing, like you said, like worker productivity, but you also kind of have to think about like what the cost is going to be, because, as much as we love the fact that there are so many companies and like to a degree you are able to just like go into entrepreneurship and do a lot of this stuff, we come back to the idea that like companies are only here to make profit.
Yeah.
Right. And this has been like a case, and this has been decided, right? What companies are actually doing is they have a responsibility legally to their shareholders and to make them money.
Yeah, it wasn't like the Supreme Court case.
Exactly.
I can't remember, like in like the mid or early 1900s, where a company, instead of like I think trying to give like payouts or paybacks to like their like stockholders, they tried to like put that more to like the workers and like tried to like increase their like wage, and then the stockholders like sued them. I don't know if I'm getting the details of the exact case wrong, but it's like the Supreme Court basically saying that like, no, the whole point of like a corporation is to like make money for the stockholders.
Yeah, basically like whoever is running the company, be it like the CEO or the whole like C-suite of the people running a company,
exactly,
can't, in quotation marks, like put up or put their considerations at the forward end of the decision-making process. And they always have to think about like this, what's going to be better for the shareholders in the end. Yeah. So, which is kind of unfortunate when you really think about it. Oh. And, you know, again, we come back to this idea because if we sort of see the track record of a lot of these big companies, right, we're not only talking about Amazon, but also like Google, maybe Walmart, stuff like this. Yeah, a lot of these jobs just kind of...
Just looking at like different sectors, like looking at like fast food. I worked fast food. Yeah. I remember like I was in high school and I really wanted to save money for college and stuff to make sure like I could take that burden off my parents. So I remember working my last 2 years at high school, like working fast food. However, like next to me working were like adults.
Yeah.
People who were like 40, 50. Half of them were like migrants from like Hispanic countries. So half of them were from Cuba, half of them from like Puerto Rico. Or not from Puerto Rico, from Dominican Republic.
Yeah.
And I remember them talking, saying that like, no, like this is like my main source of income. I work another job too, just to try to survive and live in these like duplexes, where like back where I used to live, they used to like buy like one landlord used to buy one house and then divide that into 3 different homes.
Yeah.
Like whole families of like 5 and 6 had to live in, and then they'd barely be able to afford it with like the burger money that they got. So then to me, it kind of seemed like it seemed impossible for them to like make a better future for themselves.
Yeah, and it's really interesting how, especially when you talk about a lot of these things, especially in the minds of like most Americans, right, that have, for example, like lived here all their lives, and especially if they're kind of well off or like they're not really having to worry about this, a lot of the times they'll see the situation as like, oh, well, those types of jobs are only the types of jobs that you're supposed to get when you're like a teenager, right? Like they're starter jobs. Yeah. But I think that's such like an easy fallacy to fall into because, right, we go back to the pandemic. What were these workers called? They were called essential workers. Like,
and how are we treated?
Yeah, exactly. Like these people are people that are having to potentially put their families forward through this being their only job, right? We can't delegate these jobs as like, oh, starter jobs, right? Like these are jobs that are supposed to help people get by. And that's, again, the whole reason why we are supposed to have like a minimum for wages, which, again, we look at like productivity and how much people are really getting out of it. It's not enough. Like, what is the national like minimum wage? Like $7.25?
Yeah, it's like $7.50, $7.80 or something along the lines that like
if
I think most states have like higher, I think, minimum wages than that. But then a lot of times, for example, like how we were talking about the migrant crisis.
Yeah.
Who are most the people who are working a lot of these dangerous jobs? Look at the Keystone Bridge. A lot of construction people, they're Hispanic. A lot of times they're specifically migrants. And a lot of times they can be illegal migrants. And the packing in many southern states are getting in a lot of trouble right now. I know in like Georgia, Alabama, because in a lot of car manufacturing factories and meat processing factories, they're getting in trouble because now many children, people like under the age of like 15, 16, illegals, their sponsors come in and they say, hey, you have to work this job to like pay for you to be here and to send money back at home. They end up losing their hands, their arms. They even can end up being killed.
We're literally going back to, again, the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah. where child labor is coming back, where a lot of states are just repealing
somebody
it.
With like short little hands to like put their hand in this like really dangerous spot because like, a grown person's hand won't fit in here.
Exactly.
Let's just push the children in there.
And it's like a source of like cheap labor. Example, in Florida, are 2 big industries that are like supported by like migrants, both illegal and legal, is farming and construction.
Yeah.
When Ron DeSantis put his ban in for to like any, I think, corporation or company with more than 15 workers, you have to check to see if they're like illegal or not. I remember many supporters of DeSantis, especially like big farm owners, big companies, went to him and said like, hey, like you're messing with our profit lines.
Yeah.
And I think that's like a big problem. Is like they don't see them as like people; they see them as ways to get money.
They're literally like
tools.
Cogs in the machine.
Yeah.
To turn the profits.
And it's not even just them. I think like even like everyday people do it. Like you hear the line of like, "Oh, these immigrants are taking our jobs."
Yeah.
Whereas like why aren't you like upset with the business owners who are then using cheaper labor that they can exploit and put lesser protections to, of people who are just trying to make a better life, who are trying to live the American dream? They're just as American as all of us, but yet they're the bad guy.
And even when you look at the types of jobs that these people are getting, these aren't nice jobs. Like, nobody's really fighting for these jobs because, you know, nobody really wakes up in the middle of the day and says, oh man, I really want to work like 12-hour shifts, either in like the freezing cold or in the middle of the summer heat.
Or doing sewage.
Right, doing sewage, doing like, you know, replacing the roofs of houses, right?
No.
Like, nobody, and the reason why I know all of this is because my family, again, because we're immigrants, you know, we are documented immigrants, but at the end of the day, like, we're immigrants. My dad is a blue-collar worker, and all his friends are blue-collar workers, right? Like, that's just kind of the way things are. Again, you can kind of go back to the whole, like, I'm an immigrant, so maybe that's how things kind of shaped out. But at the end of the day, like, I've seen this firsthand. Like, these people are hardworking people that are just trying to get by. And if trying to get by means being in a position of, like, doing the job that's just there, regardless of if you like it or not, at the end of the day, a lot of these people are having to put food on the tables for their families. So what are they going to do? They're going to do the job that's going to bring them money. Not because they like it. Like, people aren't fighting for these jobs. Like, realistically, like, nobody wants to be in, like, a meat packing facility, you know, not with enough sleep, like, just doing all these things that are dangerous, that aren't necessarily safe a lot of the times. So I think in a way, that whole idea of, like, some people are taking, like, our jobs, it's kind of a fallacy, because you wouldn't want that job anyway.
Yeah, and the thing that makes me like really mad is when people say, like, well, if you don't like it, why don't you go back to your like own country? Because the thing is,
that's what I'm gonna do.
Yeah, the thing is, like, a lot of migrants aren't just coming here just to like, live here. For example, like I was saying, those children who are coming here are coming specifically for work. If you look at like who's coming in from like the border, it's working age men, people who want to work, send money back home to help like take care of them. And now we're looking at it. Like my parents, who are Hispanic, who have like worked really hard. They've really worked. My dad went. I said driving buses in a previous episode. I meant to say driving limos. To like now he's like working with this big pharmaceutical company and stuff. Like he's like really like leveled. Like he's really leveled up a lot. But he doesn't want to retire in the U.S.
Which is crazy.
Even
to think
though
about,
like
right?
he's like very like patriotic and stuff like that. He's like, I'd rather go to Mexico or Spain. Because one, it's cheaper to live there. There's more like healthcare benefits. Like it'd be easier for like people to take care of me instead of living in the U.S. And we see that not only with like workers who live here, but then also now we're seeing that with the new community of expats.
Which are basically you're an immigrant. I'm sorry.
You're basically American immigrants who are going to like other countries, like in Mexico.
You're a financial refugee.
Yeah, who are going to like other places, and it's very difficult because then like in the reverse direction, they don't get the same kind of consideration.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, I know we're obviously like focusing more, talking specifically about Hispanic workers, because like that's our backgrounds, like people we know.
Yeah, so that's like our most knowledgeable area.
And that's also like people that like, I think is on the news a lot. But at the risk of sounding very, I'll say very like commie and stuff like that, it should be a class conscious thing.
Yeah.
For example, like, the Hispanic worker who's getting paid like $5 an hour, who's like lifting tiles up and like setting them down, is living a way closer life to than the white guy next to him who was raised in that exact same town doing the same task as the Hispanic guy for $7 with only a $2 raise.
Exactly.
They're much closer to each other than the one dude who owns the landscaping company paying both of them and like mistreating both of them. It's kind of a thing that we see that poverty leads to crime. If you're impoverished, if you don't have like good economic outlooks on life, like if you don't have like basic healthcare, you don't have like basic access to like food and water, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, and this happens all over the place, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not just in the U.S. this happens. Like I know, for example, in Mexico, right? You know, there's a big like drug and cartel problem. But what a lot of people don't really want to talk about is the fact that a lot of kids idolize these types of jobs or occupations or like really bad things, right? Like some genuinely, like if you go to Mexico, and especially in like really poor areas, a lot of the kids will want to be like cartel members, which is crazy to think about. Like who wants to do that? But the reason why they do that is because they see that the only people that are quote unquote like making it out, that are able to sort of get out of their current situation and have some money, some financial independence, are the people that get into the cartel.
Yeah.
So it's literally like their only way out, which it's incredibly sad, but it's because there aren't enough opportunities, both financial opportunities as well as educational opportunities, to get them out. And we see that all over the place. You see this in Mexico. You see this in the U.S. You see this in like my home state, South Carolina. You see this in Baltimore, like.
And you can see it in like just one city.
Yeah.
Taking Baltimore for example, you go to the like, or not even just Baltimore. Like you go through like multiple cities in the U.S. Whether like it doesn't matter what racial or ethnic group it is, you see, the more impoverished the community, the more likely they are to like commit crime because they have no other option. There is like nothing else they can do. Mm-hmm. In many, I'll say, Republican states, in southern states, there's I think like they have like the highest like there's like most people live below the impoverished lines, or like in red states. There are very, very high crime rates in red states. It seems like at least according to like I'll say like mainstream narratives, it seems like you would think that like it's the big blue cities that have like the highest crime rates, when in fact like a lot of times it's like these like red states. I guess like it's not fair to compare like cities to like states, but like if you look at blue states and red states have higher crime rates.
Yeah.
Especially more violent crime rates, more gun-related deaths, and it's I think there are solutions to this problem.
Yeah.
Instead of just talking about like the problems, let's talk about solution. Like, what do you think a good solution for this could be?
I think definitely just like being able and coming back to the idea that like we need you not even like talking about basic income, because like that's something that like takes a little bit more time to sort of develop into like a really good idea that can be implemented.
Mm-hmm.
But even just going back to the idea of like a minimum wage that people are genuinely able to live off
of. A livable wage.
An actual livable wage.
Yeah.
And the reason being, again, productivity has not kept up with wages. Productivity has gone way up. We have so much technology available to us that is able to just like extend our abilities far beyond what we could have had like 10, 20 years ago. Yeah. But people aren't paying you for that increase in financial abilities that you're now able to provide to a company. Mm-hmm. All these profits and everything are being given ultimately to company shareholders. And we've seen this all around. Like, just look at financial broadcastings for a lot of these big companies, right? Like Google, NVIDIA especially. A lot of these big companies, even throughout the pandemic, they've had record-breaking
Exxon.
Yeah, they had record-breaking profits, which is crazy to think about. It's not like when all this happened, everybody was equally hit. That's not what we saw. Mm-hmm. So why, in my head, it doesn't even make sense, right? Like in a society, you want everybody to do well, because if everybody does well, that just creates like a better society. I think that's like very normal. I don't think necessarily we always have to have like the really down bad class of people in order to have everything else be good.
Yeah.
Which is, some people think that way, but
no. And this makes me think of, like, I want to preface this because I want to talk a little bit about Henry Ford.
Okay.
Henry Ford is a very, 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 very bad dude, and he did not do this for any good reasons. He did not love his workers, and he was also, I'm pretty sure, like, very anti-Semitic and very racist. However, there's like, I think like one good thing he did. In his factories, he paid his workers more. His thought process, because he was very money hungry, was, hey, if I pay them a bit more, I'm creating myself a new customer base, because then they're going to be the ones who then buy my car.
Yeah.
And then that's going to spread to other places. Though he's a bad guy, I think that line of thinking is very good, very correct, in the sense that, like, if more people are making more money, that's going to lead to more people buying things, spending more money.
It's the whole reason why we got money throughout the pandemic, right? Like, the government wanted to stimulate spending by, quote unquote, giving people the ability to, through these, what do they call them again?
Through, like, the stimulus acts?
The stimulus,
like
yeah.
Stimulus
like
payments,
stimulus paychecks, right? Like, that was the whole idea, trying to, like, re-stimulate the economy by giving people, quote unquote, more money so that they could spend. But again, because this money isn't sure, it's not like it's coming in every month. Yeah. What did people do? They either, like, saved it, or they didn't use it at all.
No, and then the counter to, like, what we're saying is, what people would say is that, like, oh, what you just described would lead to inflation, which would then just, like, cause, like, a cycle of problems, and that's, like, what we're seeing now. However, it's kind of, I also think that argument and line of reasoning is, like, not good, because wages and like people's wages have not like greatly increased, especially compared to like price of living. Rent prices have greatly increased. Inflation has increased a lot faster than like income levels have like risen. So then it's more of a thing of it's not something that's like equally happening. I think different like industries, I guess it's kind of us. Rent is an inelastic demand. You will always need a house. You will always need an apartment. The apartment that me and Ricardo are living at right now, to renew,
crazy expensive.
It's already expensive. We already pay like $1,300 a month. But to renew our lease, they now raise the price to $1,500, and that's because we're just renewing the lease. I don't know if it's gonna be like more for like people who are like getting the new lease and stuff.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's not like we renew the lease and then they like repaint everything, and that doesn't happen. So like,
where's the extra value coming from? It's because. And like this has been a big thing because the U.S. has a lot of like really big corporations. You see, like you mentioned before, Google and Amazon, but also in like different industries for like internet provider and like telephone like providers. You have like
gasoline.
Yeah, there's all these like oligopolies of these like large collection of companies that then like can just not even large, small collection of companies who own most of the things. And then trick you into thinking there's a diversity of companies, where in fact any company that tries to come up against them will get crushed, will get bought, will soon be like owned by them.
And it's crazy.
You see like these different mergers.
You can see this very clearly, right? Some of these examples might be a little bit harder to grasp.
Yeah.
But one very easy example is look at any mobile service provider in terms of like cell phone. No. Right? They're only realistically being owned by like the satellites and the everything that is being used for telephone lines. Or only by 3 big companies, right? Like T-Mobile and Sprint, they had their merger. It used to be 4, now it's only 3. Yeah, T-Mobile, Sprint, Verizon, and AT&T are like the 3 big ones, right? Mm-hmm. Every other like subsidiary or a small company that wants to have a phone line out there are renting the services from these 3 people, right? Like if you look at something like Boost Mobile, if you look at something like Ryan Reynolds, like Mint Mobile, right? Like it or not, you are paying these companies so that these companies can then rent out these services from these bigger companies. So at the end of the day, the big companies could always just say, oh, I don't want to rent you my service lines anymore, or I'm going to raise the prices. Yeah. So inadvertently, now you're going to have to pay more. So which sucks for you and sucks for the company. So that isn't great. And realistically, there's nothing you can do about it. Like the amount of money, the amount of effort that it takes to put up these service networks all around the country is extremely expensive. It's prohibitively expensive. And that's the reason why no new companies can get in there, right? It's the whole idea that like we have a free market where anybody can just like make their own little thing, compete with the big guys. It's a fallacy because there have been established players in the market, so much so that if you try and get in, they'll either buy you out or they'll stomp you out. Like, there's no other way. And we see this every single time with new companies, especially in technology. Oh, got acquired by Amazon. Oh, got acquired by Apple. Oh, got acquired by Google.
Yeah. No, it's the hunter-prey model, which is like the thing from math. So maybe not everyone might get it. It is a little bit nerdy and stuff like that, but it's basically like based off of like there's like a predator prey, not a hunter prey, like predator prey model. So there's like wolves and then there's like bunnies. So it's like this dynamical system talking about like, well, if the wolf population gets too large, they're gonna just eat all the bunnies. The wolf's not gonna be like, well, we need to make a good market and we're just gonna like ration out the bunnies. Instead, they're just gonna eat all of them. So
and then eventually the wolves will die because they have no more to get from.
Exactly. So I guess like the long story short is, there needs to be something that controls their populations. So obviously you can't let the wolves get too big because if not, that'll destroy out the population. If the bunnies get too big, they're going to end up eating something else. Like they'll eat a lot of vegetation. They'll help like uproot things, cause a little bit more of desertification into like natural ecosystem. Same thing here in like the U.S. economy. Like I don't think it's like right to allow a lot of these like companies, because most apartments are not owned by like a mom and pop shop. They're not like family owned places that are like owning and like renting out these different apartments. Most of them are owned by corporations.
Yeah.
Who are just trying to make more money.
And we straight up saw this with Airbnb.
Yeah.
Right? it started as like, oh, people that just happened to have like a second home and they wanted to rent it out, and it was kind of that like mom and pop model, where it was just these very small people that would just like rent out, like, oh, maybe we have a second home, or maybe we have a little space that we can rent out. But eventually people started seeing, or big companies especially, right, like big management companies started seeing, hey, we can kind of make a lot of money. So then they started buying all these properties, and so it turned into a problem, to the point where like in certain areas, like in New York, you cannot get short-term leases for places.
Yeah, and not only that, it also increased the price of living for other places, because then like who wants to do a 1-year contract with some tenants when they can have like 10 people from like Jersey or Florida come in, pay like 4 times more what it's worth to like stay there for like 2-3 weeks. And it's not even just the U.S. that's impacting. It's like impacting on like a lot of different places, like a lot of different countries.
Yeah.
And then New York, when they banned Airbnbs from like happening, what happened? Housing prices decreased. Which is, I think, like, again, the risk of sounding very like commie, but at least to me, it makes sense to have like limits and like rent, like cap prices on like how much you can charge rents, especially in like specific areas. Like if you won't increase wages, because if not, that just increases the homeless problem.
Yeah.
I can't remember the exact statistic, but I remember like reading that like I believe it's like 50 or maybe even 40% of Americans wouldn't be ready to pay a like random, I think like $500 or maybe $800 like fine. Like if something happened, they had to pay like $500, $800, they didn't have the money for it.
Yeah, not only that, but, maybe a fine, but you bring it closer to home. Just going to your average like doctor's visit, right?
Yeah.
What if there's something like you need a quick scan or whatever, and then now you're out paying thousands of dollars? That's like a genuine fear that a lot of Americans have, right? It's because they don't have enough money. And it's crazy.
You see rent price increases.
You see this on TikTok especially, right? Like people are talking about like, oh yeah, I only have like $100 in my bank account, and it's like, yeah, and I've been living like this for like 2 years. Like,
no, it's terrifying.
That's crazy.
And what's even like scary then is that like when that like small little thing does happen, that like unfortunate accident happens, they're homeless.
You can literally have an ingrown nail. Like it doesn't have to be anything big. Like you don't have to get into an accident. Like, oh, maybe you like burned yourself a little too bad whenever you were cooking, and now you have to go see the doctor. Like,
yeah. And then from there, there's like, especially when you're homeless, you don't have much like protections. Like people say like, oh, there's like different like services that they provide, and there's also like unemployment checks. But things like those aren't enough to survive.
And not only that, but they're saturated too.
Exactly. So it's kind of like at that point, you don't have enough money to like, pay for a house. You're getting like some small amounts of income here and there. However, like, what are you gonna do? A lot of people then turn to like drugs to help them like cope through all this like pain, because that's not easy. Like it's hard to be sober and then sleep out in the cold where you risk getting frostbite, where you risk losing limbs.
Right.
So what do? You get in that cycle of drugs. You get into like that cycle of like crime, because then you need to get more money, and it just like feeds into it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of the things that, especially when you're not in this type of environment, you're like, oh, why would people do that? Like it seems so irrational to just like go to drugs. But what you're not seeing is that a lot of the times spending that money on drugs or trying to save it does nothing for their situation, because it's not enough to get them out.
Yeah.
A lot of the times it's not enough.
No, and it's like the big thing. I'm like, that like terrifies me about politics is that people have become like less and less like empathetic, and they really like, I'll say, like demonize people in their heads. Yeah. Like people demonize like homeless people. People demonize like sometimes different ethnic groups, and then like it's extremely like scary to me. Like charity is nice and stuff, but we need to have like the government actually like step in and like help protect people. Like when people were getting mad that like Biden wanted to like pay off student loans, like I couldn't wrap my head around it, because at the end of the day I'm like, isn't that what you want? Because people keep saying like, oh, you're trying to buy the young vote, and I'm like, isn't that what the government like? I'm not saying like they have to like buy our vote, but isn't the whole purpose of the government to like benefit the people? And if not, what's the point?
But even then, right, if you think about it, how many like Americans have a payment every month, right, which could range anywhere from like $100 to a few hundreds of dollars per month in student loan debt, which first of all, these loans are extremely predatory. Like the fact that somebody that is 18 years old, like frontal lobe barely developed.
Yeah, it's still not developed yet. They're still developing. Still 25.
Still developing. Is just getting handed down like thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? With the promise, and we go again back to the whole idea of like, everybody should go to college, but maybe it's a little bit expensive for some people. There are smarter ways to go about it. I completely get that. But at the same time, like there are people that are trying to take advantage of you, not the colleges themselves even. It's the predatory loans that people are trying to get for education. Education is always good, but there are always people that are trying to take advantage of the systems that are already in place, even if they're already good. Yeah. And we've seen this with a lot of companies. But imagine like if we get rid of this like monthly payment that people have, sure, some people may save it for their future, which is all good and fine, but now they have money to spend. Now they have money to go and try and buy a house. Now there's money to go and try and buy a car.
Joke's on you, they can't buy a house because then a lot of different corporations and banks are buying houses and then renting it out to them.
Yeah.
So then now it's become like for us when we get older, we probably can't buy a house.
And honestly, and that's the worrisome thing, right? As I'm an immigrant. I've came to the U.S. and I love the U.S., right? Like there's so many different things, and especially when you're looking at a country like Mexico, it is a lot safer in the U.S. Like, the U.S. definitely has its problems, but comparatively, just because of the amount that the government is able to do, even, it's a lot better. But if I'm not able to literally exist here in the U.S., the fact that I'm even rationalizing, just being like, okay, I'm fine with going back to Mexico, even despite how dangerous it might be, the fact that like I see that as an out is already like a concerning thought.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of people see, right? Like they want to go to countries, to places that are a lot cheaper, because at the end of the day, we do become these we go into these financial crises because the structures that are in place are not able to support us as a society, which is scary.
No, and it really hurts me because the thing is like my family's like moved around. Like they were originally born in Cuba, and then I was like born in Canada. I only lived in Canada for a couple of years, and then I basically grew up most of my life in Florida. Like, for me, I love the U.S.
You are the Florida man.
I am the Florida. The thing is like, I actually am so like extremely patriotic, and like all these things I say about like America's faults, it like hurts me. Because the thing is like I want to like live the rest of my life in the U.S. I want to like keep being like an American. I want to keep being here. But the thing is America's becoming more and more a place where you work and then you have to dip.
Yeah.
You can't stay here. Like housing, too expensive. Healthcare, too expensive. You can get paid well. America's relatively safe, especially compared to some other countries, but it's really just a place to work.
Yeah.
I don't want that. I want to be able to like have a family here. I want to be able to like be proud and say like, hey, I'm an American where we take care of our fellow Americans. Look at our veterans who are homeless, who don't get that many benefits, who like aren't taken care of. There's been like those recent studies that have been shown that like the tar pits that were happening in, I can't remember, it was like Afghanistan or maybe some other Middle Eastern country, that showed that like they had people working like these like tar pits that was like causing toxic, for them to like breathe in toxic fumes. And then even a new report showing that like exposure to like really loud sounds like grenades and like bombs that they did in like trainings would then cause them to develop that thing that happens to have football players, like CTE, I think is what it's called. So then that would explain like why a lot of like people who maybe didn't see active duty but were like reserves, who were doing a lot of trainings, who were like drill sergeants, who were helping with like grenades and teaching how to people use how to grenades, they'd go crazy because then their brain was getting like destroyed by the sounds. It was too loud. And it's kind of like, if we can't protect those people, then like I know they can't protect us.
Yeah.
Which like really sucks. It like, it's kind of like, how do I say? I'm trying to think of a good analogy that I can like say that's like appropriate.
Yeah.
Because it feels like a broken home. Like when I say broken home, I mean like a house like a home that's like in tatters. Mm-hmm. Like the windows busted, the doors completely open, and like people can come in like take whatever money or take whatever they want from you.
Like the structure itself is just not sound enough to really build anything around it at that point.
Exactly. It's a decaying house.
Exactly. Like if the whole like floor is starting to rot, you wouldn't put anything new because at the end of the day that whole structure is gonna fall down, right? So it provides like no safety as much of a shelter as you want it to be.
Yeah.
Like it's just crumbling at that point.
Okay.
And yeah, like it just sucks at that point.
And I will say now I guess I'll turn this around because I am a little bit of a cynical person, but when we look to the future, we shouldn't be so bleak. I feel like we've spent a good 30-ish minutes.
It's a rant. It was a rant.
Just ranting basically about like our fears for the future and like a lot of like injustices that we see. But I guess let's be a little more optimistic. Let's try to talk about like maybe like some like cool things that we think could be happening to like help us. Because like at least for me, I'm excited because like places like Michigan are investing a lot more in like public transportation, which will reduce a lot more fossil fuels, make transport a lot easier, and reduce a lot of accidents. It makes it easier to travel too. And as well, in Michigan, I think they're doing a lot of really cool stuff where they're like cementing a lot more like rights for like people. They're like making voting more accessible. And I feel like there's a growing, I would say like progressive wing in the Democratic Party. They're like trying to push for like, I think common sense laws in the sense of for guns, for healthcare, and for essential living.
Yeah. And I think all of those are like really good. And especially like when you look at transportation, it's just a thought that crossed my mind.
Trains are cool.
Not only are trains are cool, but think about this. Like for the people that like love their gas guzzlers, right?
Oh my goodness.
Like for people that love their cars. And I totally get it. I'm a car person. I love cars, right? Like the technology that is able to be packed into cars, amazing.
It's cool.
Some people just don't want to drive. Some people shouldn't drive.
That's me.
Exactly.
I hate driving so much.
Imagine a world where there is no traffic. And so now you have roads, right? Like it or not, these types of transportation helps everyone. Because now there's less people that are just having to be on the road because they have to. So now the people that truly want to be on the road are getting to enjoy that experience because it's less cluttered.
Yeah. And it's kind of like, we had the idea from like, I'll say like, earlier on, when we made the Intercontinental Railroad, like that was a good idea. That increased commerce, that increased trade. They did in a really bad way. It was really bad. But like in Japan and like a bunch of different other countries, in Japan, Korea, and China, they have like, actually I don't know if Korea, but Japan and China, I know for a fact, they have like bullet trains.
Yeah.
Like we can't track. I can't remember how much, but I know it's like billions upon billions of dollars that the military uses for like whatever project they want to use. We don't know where it's gone. It's like, there's like, oh, we don't know. It's a black hole. It's gone. Why can't we use that money to like make our own selves like a bullet train? I could get then like Florida to Jersey in like I don't know how many hours, but it would be way better than just driving up the I-95.
I honestly think, and this is a thing that I think both parties, like it or not, kind of have the right idea about. And that's the fact that inside the government, there's a lot of mismanagement of money. Now, within each party, a lot of them will argue like what exactly that mismanagement is. But like it or not, there is some mismanagement of money that could be better spent into better infrastructure and just bettering the lives of people. Like it or not, the government has money. A lot of people like to pretend that it doesn't.
Yeah, they say like, oh, we're like trillions of dollars in debt. How are we gonna pay rent next month? I'm like, you guys, we're the ones who are printing the money. Like, who do you think is going to be our debt collector?
Like it or not, the U.S. is still one of the richest countries in the world.
No, it still is the richest. We have the highest GDP.
It's the richest. So if you really think about it,
we pay the most in healthcare.
Right? That's like telling a millionaire who's living month to month.
Yeah.
Like a millionaire should be able to live without living month to month, right? So it's the same idea here, right? Like the U.S. maybe, and that's all I'm saying is that maybe it's trying to live above its means.
No, they're making its people live above its means. Because like probably in California, you probably make. I'm just kidding. Okay, this is a little bit more facetious, but like in California, you can make like really good money and still be living paycheck to paycheck.
If you have to live in the Bay Area, your paycheck's on. Like
yeah.
Because of the market, it's bad.
And it's something that like I really hate because then people say like. Because there's a lot of things we say like are targeted more towards like democratic politics, and so then like especially like, I'll say like a lot of Democrats will be like, oh, see, this is why you should vote blue. However, for example, look at California. There's a lot of I think Democrats who kind of like say like, oh, I'm gonna help the people. I'm gonna like help the homeless. When in fact, especially if you look at like different places, like I think in New York and California, they're really trying to push out migrants. They're really trying to push out the homeless. They're trying to push out the poor. They're not really doing what they say they're doing. A lot of times the Democrats just act as controlled opposition. And, like, it's extremely painful to see because then, like looking between like the Democrats and the Republicans for like presidents, for the presidential race, but like now with Biden and Trump, no one wants to vote for any of them. They're tired. Both so old and like they're both so far gone. Yeah. It's just kind of like so painful. But then you have to vote for the lesser two evils. And it's kind of like it makes me not want to vote. Yeah. Because then like a lot of times.
And you're very like into politics. So if you don't want to imagine like the average person.
Yeah, no. Most of my family doesn't want to vote. And I'll say like, most of my family is extremely conservative. They're the traditional Cubans. Like I remember they would call me like the communist because I voted for Biden and stuff. And even then like that, like I don't care about all of that. Like I still like say like, oh, please vote, please vote. Like voting is like your civic responsibility. And like the proud American, like we all should want to vote. We should have higher voting things. But when some parties are saying like, hey, we have to limit voting access to some people, we have to like increase gerrymandering, it like, and then another party is saying like, hey, they're bad guys, vote for me. I won't do anything different, but if you vote for me, the bad guys won't win. Things will just stay still for a second.
Like you kind of know it's bad when, you know, the only positive is that you're not voting for the other guy. Yeah. That's it. Like there is no pros. It's just... it's not him.
It's not it. Like, don't worry, guys. I swear, I'm old, but I'm cool.
Yeah, exactly. I'm hip and young. I'm fellow kids. Yeah. So that's the thing. But I genuinely feel like the U.S., and that's the thing, right? Whenever we're saying this out of a place of like love for the U.S. Yeah. Because we know it can do better. Like, it's the exact same reasons why a lot of teachers, especially people that are perfectionists, will always like criticize their own art. It's not because they think their art sucks, but it's because they know how much better it can be, right? Like, never in your world you're going to see someone that is going to be arguing for, like, a cause that is completely lost. Yeah. Right? So every conversation, not only us, but, like, if you see people arguing about a lot of these things, right, and they're criticizing the U.S., you should never think that it's because they absolutely hate the U.S., because if that was truly the case, they'd be gone. Like, they wouldn't even be here. Yeah. And that's truly the case. Like, for as many people that say, oh, I don't want to live in the U.S. anymore, they're saying for a reason, and it's because they know that it can do better with enough help. And I think that's like the glimmer of hope that we should all be looking forward to, right? Because as we're getting older, a lot of us are going to start getting not only into the workforce, but potentially a lot of powerful positions, be it in government or in other areas of either the economy or like social work, where we can truly make a difference and, you know, hope for the better in the case. But definitely what we need is to know where all this information is coming from, know how our government is spending our money. Yeah. And, you know, being really knowledgeable about the ways that we can truly be effective at fixing a lot of the systemic problems that come with the U.S. Again, the U.S. is not a perfect place. I don't necessarily think any place is, but it can be doing so much better because it has the potential to.
No, and also like my final thoughts are like, and I'm more of like, I'm a bit more left leaning, as like you guys could like hear in the conversations and everything I've been saying. Most of my family is extremely right-wing, like as right-wing as you can imagine. However, they identify the same problems as I do. Exactly. Like in like American society. They say, wow, it's becoming hard to live here. Wow, the banks are like buying up a lot of property and they're like bringing it through. Like it's kind of suspicious. It makes it harder for people to buy homes. Like, wow, like I'm having a hard time living in the U.S. The main problem is where we come to like come up with solutions to these problems. Exactly what you're saying. I think we need to do a better job of like educating people, of like letting people know like the facts, because unfortunately it's like something that I deal with back at home where people say like, hey, this guy on Rumble told me the earth is flat, so it really is like a two-side thing. There's two different equal parties that each have equal facts, and I feel like in a lot of cases like that's not the case. I feel like there needs to be like better efforts to like really like educate people onto like who really is like making you suffer in American society. Because it's not the like poor immigrant who's like working in like farming or in a factory. It's the person who owns both you and the immigrant.
Bro doesn't have enough in the energy business to even do that. He's just trying to live.
He's just trying to live, and he's barely doing that.
Exactly. So yeah, definitely like just get a lot like more information about this. There's so many different places. Like obviously listen to politicians and see what they say, but also be skeptical, right? Like I don't necessarily think that, and people have the fear of like government becoming too big, and like I totally get that. But at the same time, corporations are also not your friends, right?
Corporation's already too big.
They have a vested component into this. Like companies want to do better, and so that's what you should know and take into consideration when you're thinking about all of this. Like Republican, centrist, if you're left leaning, like whatever you are, like we're all just trying to live and be in a better position than we are yesterday. Yeah. Right? I think that's a very common sentiment, right? We just want to live in a good place, and I think that's a pretty human thing to want.
Yeah, exactly.
So we should all try to work together and sort of look past people that are trying to pit us against each other and really look at how the government is doing and what we can do to improve not only the government but like the situation of like every American.
Yeah, I think it's important. Just like, please try to like learn more about like current events, and like try to learn more about like the U.S. Try to learn more about like what happens in daily life. Learn a little bit more about politics. Please vote. Please be like civically engaged. I think like that's the only way we can like fix a lot of the problems that like we're facing.
Yeah. So I guess that concludes that. So definitely get informed. If you have any like comments or what you thought about the episode, definitely like leave them in the comments down below.
Yeah, please.
So yeah, but that's been it. Thank you for, coming and having this conversation.
Yeah.
You're definitely like a very strong personality coming in, but I know that like you enjoy this type of topic, and that's really good, right? Because it shows that you're engaged and that you really care about this. So thank you.
No, of course, and I'm always glad to be on the show. It's always a lot of fun.
All right. Thank you, guys.